Good morning, everybody. This is David coming to you from beautiful and snowy and cold Helsinki, Finland. Unfortunately, today, all three of us are in productions, and there's no way in the world that we're going to be able to do a show. So instead, we're going to offer you a very special Best of Light Talk episode from way back in January 2020 when we spoke to legendary show producer, lighting designer, Mark Brickman. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, eggnog, or whatever the hell you're drinking this morning, and enjoy.
This is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, and you, my friend, are listening to Light Talk.
And good morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida. And today we are speaking with the legendary lighting artist, show director, and producer, Mark Brickman on Light Talk.
And this is David in beautiful Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Today, we continue our Legends of Lighting series with my all-time favorite rock and roll lighting and production designer, Mark Brickman. Hi, Mark.
How are you? You're making me blush.
I've got your poster on the wall, and every night I kneel down and I pray that the
what
lighting
poster?
gods come touch me. Yes, the one with you up there.
That's that Farrah Fawcett pose you did.
Oh, wait, it was Farrah Fawcett. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark. I got confused. Anyway,
Okay,
Stan, why don't you tell us a little bit about Mark's truly amazing career?
I'm going to make it short because it's so incredible that if we did the whole thing, we wouldn't have time for the interview. And, Mark is in my class every semester for the last 25 years doing this shtick that he did on some television magazine show years ago. So it is my honor to sort of read this to you. So let me just tell you a little bit about Mark, one of our legends of lighting. So we're just going to do some bullet points and get right into it. So in the music world, here's just a short list of some bands you might have heard of. Pink Floyd, Paul McCartney, Blue Man Group, Barbra Streisand, she's not really a group, Bruce Springsteen, David Gilmour, Whitney Houston, Neil Young, Nine Inch Nails. Film, Minority Report, AI, Artificial Intelligence, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, Running Man, iRobot, Cat in the Hat, and commissions at the Salzburg Festival, the 2012 relighting of the Empire State Building, Hans Zimmer live in Prague, and on Broadway, Young Frankenstein, and recently, Once Upon a Dream starring the Rascals. And that's just a few. So welcome to our humble little show, Mark Brickman. And David has our first question to get us rolling.
Oh, by the way, we should mention right now that Mark did this fantastic podcast with the Geezers.
That's right.
We highly recommend people to check it out. I forgot the episode number, but we should do a link to that because it's really a really good interview. But we're going to sort of focus less on the technical areas and more on the art. So we're going to start off with, unlike many other live event designers, your design work is very theatrical. You create atmospheres and transitions and certainly tell a story with your designs. What do you attribute this to?
That's a good question. In the beginning, it wasn't conscious at all. It was really all emotional in the moment. Over the years, I began, searching for why people would come up to me and tell me, this was incredible, or you're a genius, or all these things, because it freaked me out. I was either doing lights for Bruce Springsteen or I would have been homeless. So I didn't understand what I was doing because I didn't get through college, even though I went to a very prestigious high school.
What high school?
It's called Central High School. It's the second oldest public high school in America. And it started in 1836. It's second to the Boston Public School. And at the time when I went in the 60s, and I graduated in 70, it was an all-boys school, and it took students from all over the city of Philadelphia. They had to be admitted to the school. And my father had gone there, and so I went there. It was a long trip from where I lived. There was a high school in walking distance from where I lived, but I had to get on 3 buses a day. So I read a lot, and then I started really reading about art and light and cinematographers. Started meeting cinematographers. Started meeting real artists. Started learning about painting. I basically educated myself in a very basic course of art history. I guess I started really understanding what I was doing because I didn't want to overthink it. I think if you overthink something, you get bogged down in the minutia. And music back then was very spontaneous. There weren't really tracks running with backup vocals and time codes for all the video, and everything had to be right to the second. Even with Pink Floyd, they would have a click track counting them in. And that was the first time I came up to that. I mean, Bruce was 4 hours of just untamed, savagery back then. So
rock and roll, baby.
Yeah. I mean, it was that, and among that, there was Carole King and Jackson Browne and the whole West Coast side of the music business that I got involved in. But Bruce taught me how to be spontaneous by just being savage. That's probably the word. There was just, take no prisoners. He destroyed every audience. So, when I got to Pink Floyd, they had counts just to keep the film in sync, even though it really wasn't. It was a wild sync. And so they counted in, so everybody started on time, and then the click would go off.
That's interesting.
There was a couple of other segments, like on the run, when we would have to let the plane off. We would, as soon as the film started, we'd start to click. So you were, it was like 32 to 34 seconds. You had it before the end that you had to say go for the plane or the bed. But I just learned. I learned by actually working all the time. That list you read is pretty scary. Made me really tired.
In a good way.
It's great.
Yeah, I got exhausted listening to it.
Just to follow up, we were talking about the theatrical nature of your designs. You mentioned Pink Floyd, obviously the Genesis, a lot of these other great theatrical type bands. So this is music that tells a story. It's really interesting that's how you started this, and you really didn't overthink it.
Well, it was all Bruce. Yeah, it was all Bruce, because when Bruce, in the beginning, we had 24 lights, but when he would start telling these stories, to have him in a follow spot didn't feel right to me. It was a feeling. It just didn't feel right. I wanted it to be, in my mind, what I was looking at, I wanted it to be more mysterious. I didn't want to see his face. Right. I wanted him to be every man. And so everybody could relate to him. He wasn't like being pointed out with a light. He was just really more of a painting. But I didn't know that I was doing that. It wasn't conscious.
It's like jazz.
Yes, exactly.
Just a small follow-up. Do you think that you were born with that artistic intuition?
I think everyone has the ability to be an artist. I saw David Byrne's show twice in the last month on Broadway, and he talks about, when you're born, you have millions of connections, and then you lose them over time, these connections, because you're taught to look at other things. And I've been reading a lot of books lately about, because there's so much focus on people's behavior these days, and you have all these labels. But at the end of the day, I think that, each of us are born with all the same abilities, but some come to the forefront naturally and maybe even environmentally, at times. But I don't get hung up in it too much. I mean, like I said, for me, it was survival. I just had to work because I wanted to eat. And I think at the end of the day, it's just a basic human function to eat. So,
Yeah, I've heard that. I read a book about eating. Yeah, that's true.
Mark, could you tell us a little more about designing in the moment? Because you use that term a lot. It's a term that I use as well. I'm just curious how you came to this process.
well, with Bruce, you never knew what song he was playing. You never knew and it would be visual cues. He'd tug on his ear. You'd see him turn around to the band. He'd like kick his elbow out, or something would happen. And so and back then it was a 2-scene preset. There wasn't like a whole hog or a grand MA or disguise or all these things that you have to think about first before you can operate them. Right. I mean, if you really think about that for a second, it's like you said, jazz, you have an instrument, a manual instrument, and you're playing with some other people, and you need to stay in the groove. That's exciting.
Do you play an instrument, Mark? Did you play an instrument?
I played clarinet when I was young. My uncle was in the big bands. He was a saxophone player, and he gave me a clarinet when I was young. I play some ukulele now. I was actually just in New York, and not only did I see David Byrne, I saw 2 nights at Lincoln at Jazz Center with it was Steve Miller hosting all this really young sextet that's been nurtured by Lincoln at Jazz Center and Wynton Marsalis, and it was amazing. These guys and the vocalist were just, it was from another planet. The weekend really put my faith back into real musicians playing real music with real instruments, and David Byrne put my faith back into, an artist in his later years, not just playing the hits for the sake of Live Nation and all the other promoters and Ticketmaster. Right. For a moment 3 years ago, he and I had chatted about what was in his head, and I did some drawings for him. I was very excited because I've always been a huge fan. And then, I don't know, something happened, of course, in the business side of it, because artists aren't allowed to be artists anymore. They have to fit into this formula, the line item. I mean, all the way down the line. There's really nothing out there that's spontaneous because there's so much thought that goes into every last aspect of it. It takes away the magic, which is the spontaneity of, because we're not there to look at huge sets that have been erected by some people, that I'm still not sure how they relate. And you're there, or you used to be there for the music, but I mean, those are really all good questions. And obviously, I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man, and I'm starting to, so I better shut up.
Next question.
You fit right in.
That's right.
Steve has our next question.
Well, you may have actually already answered this. You opened a door a second ago, and you talked about being spontaneous. You talked about there was a day in which there was no grand MA. It was just the lighting designer and a headset and a 2-scene preset board. I mean, your career has spanned some real technology developments, new consoles, new fixtures, projection, digital media. My question to you is, how has technology affected your approach to design?
Without being egomaniacal, and I really don't like being that, but in 1987, when I was, asked to join the reincarnated Pink Floyd, Vari-Light had just come out. And I went and watched Alan Owen's show at Genesis, which was mind-blowing, absolutely fucking mind-blowing. But the one thing I noticed right off the bat was I couldn't do a whole show with those lights going back and forth, wiggling around in one space. So I went away and realized if I used less lights, but I was able to move them, that I could have one that could still maintain my style of darkness and light, and highlighting the music, bringing the music visually in a visual interpretation of the music of who was playing in the moment at the time, where you naturally would feel watching it, And so I was able to move these Vari-Lights in an XYZ. Well, once I did that, then I realized I could have a few different types of these new lights, like telescans. I'd have pods, I'd have motors. Suddenly there was like this, I had a bunch of, really talented guys around me. And then I added lasers in and fiber rays and I added, Pink Floyd really wanted something different. So I think what happened was I created this team, a band, my own band of technicians, which is now our standard way of operating. But I kept it very in the way they were programming those boards, because they were so basic, that we just set parameters that everyone ran live. In other words, they would run their consoles live, just like I used to run a 2-scene preset. No, obviously the pods had a lot of safety issues, but everyone manually was running things in the moment, and everybody was paying attention. So it was like having my own jazz band. I don't know if it works. I mean, when I do a show, it does still work that way. For most parts, I've been on shows where, they push the button, the time code starts, and everybody gets coffee.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even convince a student to use a fader. They just like, what are those for?
You can tell your students that in 1987, one night sitting in the Toronto airport at 3 a.m., the laser table caught fire. And so, and when the laser table caught fire, we were all kind of, just say we weren't, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at first thing in the morning. So we all looked at these flames going up behind the stage and kind of...
wow, man, that's cool.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. And then suddenly everybody jumped up and freaked out. We ran back there. We put the fire out. We turned all the power off. We got the fire out. We all saw these headlines, Pink Floyd crew burns down Toronto airport. Because back then you could rehearse in the hangars and not go through the stuff you go through now. But when we finally got back to the consoles at about 4 a.m., they powered everything back up, and I'm sitting there. Screen comes back on, and there were the VL3s, I think, back then. And when they initialized, they did their initialization, but then they swung into the screen. They spun around like everybody loves that look. They spun around, then they floated back out toward us, and then went back in and did the iris move, and then stopped. And I looked at the screen, and then I remember looking at Dale Polanski going, "That's it, man. That's exactly what I've been looking for. That's it. I'm going home now. You make that happen, and I'm happy. We can go."
That's great. That's great.
And so I would tell your students that maybe they should look at the fader. They might discover something.
When I first saw that cue, I said, "How did he come up with this? This is so brilliant." Because it's like a kaleidoscope, and it's just like sweeping across.
It was a mistake.
I know.
It was a mistake.
It happened.
Mistake.
And I got to be honest with you. A lot of my favorite moments in some shows have always been a mistake.
Absolutely.
We've been doing things, pushing buttons, not really getting there. And then suddenly somebody might push the wrong button, and I've always got my eyes open. And it's a mistake.
That's the key. That's the beautiful thing. You just said it, is that you had the eyes to see it as something more than a mistake. You saw it as something as art, right? You had your eyes open. You were watching, and you went, "Hey, that's cool." It doesn't matter how it got there, does it? Right?
Yeah, and so technology actually, if it's not taught correctly, like for instance, so everybody used to watch those shows and they emulated it, and I'm very flattered. But what they didn't really ever pick up on was what I just said, was that it wasn't because it was so thought out. It was the fact that I'm just always open to opportunity, and then I have to make a choice. And really, I mean, that's for me, I guess, the way I do things.
You have to be that way to be a musician. Being a musician is listening. I mean, if you're in jazz band, you have to listen to what everyone else is doing. And it's the same thing in light, because you're listening to everybody.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
It's a good place for the follow-up question, Steve.
And I think Mark's already answered it. I guess the question is, as we enter into this kind of arms race with a new piece
Yeah,
of lighting equipment every week.
Right.
Do you think that that's getting in the way? Do you think that people are not, what can I say? They're not creating anything. They're just looking for that effect. And so we see it hit in that show, and then we never see it again because no one wants to use that effect because it's been used.
Well, when you say that effect, it's usually effect that the engineers in at the manufacturers.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you're relying on them, and they never come out and see the shows. They're caught in their ones and zeros. That's the last thing they want to do is like go on tour and let even the pain and suffering of a crew bus, inform your decisions because you're so worn out that you. But then you suddenly see something that lifts you up. Look. When I started, that was a time that'll never be repeated. We're in a completely different, day and age now. I think, though, we're still all human, and I think that what gets failed to be taught, and that's just basic education starting back when you're first born, is just mystery, not having everything so revealed. It's like, it's social media for me is great, but, everything in moderation. I just, but again, I sound like an old man. I think I probably would feel a little bit better about it if everything just wouldn't be repeated and look exactly the same. Like I said, like David Byrne's show, he was on this from the very first moment, and he embraced the technology but dialed it back to simplicity. I don't think there's very many of the lighting. They all think more and more and more, and I'm not criticizing them, but they are in a pattern, especially at the big shows, where it's these and they think they have to have the newest, greatest light that's out there. But at the end of the day, if you start with darkness, and you turn a flashlight on, you're going to feel something.
Well, maybe the follow-up question is who's getting in the way? Is it the manager? Is it the producer? Is it the record label who's saying, don't take any chances right now, just give us the show that we know will sell a ticket?
No, because that's always been present, that attitude. But I think what's different is that the artists themselves aren't that involved to begin with. They're more involved in their social media and brand marketing and how they can become more and more famous, which then trickles down to the agents and the promoters. And then you're dealing now with one promoter in the world who does everything. And not that they tell you what your show should look like, but they have certain line items. There's a certain expectation. If you don't have a big LED screen, well, the audience isn't going to be happy. I don't know how many times I've been told that. And I'm like, and how do you know that? How do you know the audience isn't going to be happy? I mean, like just because you had it there last week, you think you have to have it again this week? That was somebody else's. That was another band. That's not this band. Why do you have to have the screen? Why? Guess what? What? Like Sheryl Sandberg says, why don't you have to lean in? I mean, I don't get it. I mean, we promote one thing, but nobody has the courage to and it's usually the big bands.
It's going back to your Bruce Springsteen statement about I want to see him in dark or he's every man. There's not a follow spot picking him out. Without naming any names, I know an artist who opened their show in about 30 seconds of backlight, and that lasted one performance. And the manager was at the desk saying, 5 seconds, and then let's get some light on the face.
Yeah, well, that's it right there. I mean, first of all, when you said to me 30 seconds, I'm like, what? What are you kidding me? I mean, and the manager's going 5. Okay, in this day and age, 10. But to be honest with you, what it does is it sets up an you have an expectation. The reason you go to a show is because you have an expectation, and your expectation is not the big LED screens and the massive set built by on that whole other IPO level. What it's about is your expectation of being able to connect not only with the artist but with the other audience members. You're not home in your house anymore. So now this is a connection. So all bets are off, really. It's not going to change the fact of what you do outside of that arena.
Yep.
It'll enhance what all the efforts of the manager and the record company and the agents and Live Nation and everybody else if the show was different. But if immediately you see something that you could watch on TV, that's why people are walking away. If they don't start with a hit, people are walking down the aisles because they're bored. There's nothing to look at.
You save your money all year to go see that band.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you
could
could stay home and listen to them on a great set of headphones. You go there to see the music.
That's right. That's right. And that's the disconnect. The disconnect. And I got to be honest with you. You know, it's 27 years now, or no, 25, somewhere around. Yeah, 25 years since we did Pink Floyd. You know, Pulse, and the Stones are out there. Then there was U2, and you know, And Willie Williams and Mark Fisher were always a great team. Mark Fisher and myself were always a really great team because I loved Mark and miss him. And I think that during the period of the 90s, those shows had such an effect on everyone that the young designers that are out there now, that's what they grew up looking at. Because they were young, they probably remembered the really big spectacle moments. They weren't really understanding the rest of it, I don't think, because they were probably in a stadium. They weren't in a theater.
Right.
And a lot of people probably don't go to theater anymore. But theater is really where it starts. Theater is intricate to people learning how to think differently, because in theater you will see darkness, and you will, go to a ballet. I mean, go to your community theater. Do something that is not on the screen, where it's a connection with live human beings. And I think, I don't think I could sit here and preach and everyone's going to stop using all the buttons that all these consoles come with. But I think maybe another generation could learn how to maybe, really appreciate all the depth of the artists that are out there in the world. Not just myself. I still don't understand why people study me. So I think that's just stupid. But
you're
anyway.
sort of an icon in some ways,
Yeah, I don't get that.
Maybe that leads right into Stan's question.
It does.
Okay.
Stan,
well,
that's a perfect.
I thought that I will, but I thought you sort of answered it. But maybe I'll ask the question and see where you go with it. So I'm fascinated on your thoughts of, chiaroscuro, of light and shadow, because your work is so highly theatrical. You use contrast to great effect. So, and darkness is a key element. But, you talk about what's missing in lighting education, how to train young people to think about darkness. And although I have a hard time telling my students to turn the light on sometimes, they think about darkness too much. And it's a balance, right? So, so why do you think many designers are sort of afraid of the dark, or afraid of the light, or of making that theatrical picture that you were so good at?
You're right about one thing. They're not afraid of the dark because they don't light the bands anymore. I'm now talking about the big shows. None of the bands are ever lit. The audience is always lit. And again, that's another one of these. They expect to be lit. The audience needs to be lit because they're part of the show. Well, that's been taken so far
ridiculous.
to that in air graphics. Air graphics are like okay, right. But I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think it's about scale. So if you have the darkness in a theater, or your students are afraid, that's good. But when they start putting one light on at a time, they start seeing something. It's always the negative space between the light.
Right.
So when I talk about the darkness, I'm also talking about the negative space, which makes people larger than life. The bands are really dark these days, and they're paying for it. No one's ever going to speak to me again after this, but it's okay.
No, I don't know about that. This might help.
Anyway, hey, so Mark, I saw your Rascal show, Once Upon a Dream, at the Greek a couple of years ago. It was excellent. I really loved it. And,
Thank you.
Partially because I'm a huge Rascals fan. Could you tell us how you got involved in that project?
When I left Springsteen, I still friends with the band. And Stevie Van Zandt and myself have stayed friends all these years. So he called, and that was his lifelong dream, was
Right.
We were like we were like Zero Mostel and
Gene Wilder.
and Gene Wilder. You know, Stevie was Zero Mostel and I was Gene Wilder. You know, and that's how we got there. I got to tell you, the Rascals. When I was a kid, I just loved the Rascals, and Dino Danelli was my hero. And when I finally met him, and then I had to deal with him and Felix over a course of,
right,
a year. Yeah, that sometimes it's not great to meet your heroes. It's like when I was working on AI, I'd been working on it for a while. And then one day, Kathy Kennedy said to me, the producer said, we want you to meet Steven. And I went, that's okay. I don't want to meet Steven. I'm fine, honest. I mean, it's cool. He's a god. So how about I don't meet him? It's just, look, those guys are historical. It was great to put them back together again. But sometimes you can't go backwards, right? And so it was fun. I'm glad it happened. We have great memories. We had a great run on Broadway. Right. We actually made money, so it was an amazing time, amazing 18 months I spent. So I can thank Stevie for that.
Well, I would say let's continue with some of this early work. How did you get started with Pink Floyd?
Well, I had been touring with Bruce for quite a while, from 1972. And in 1977 or 78, I moved out here to L.A. I left Monmouth Beach. And I started working for other people also, like Boz Scaggs, and I started working for Carole King, and like I said, Jackson, and other people. And it was just around this time. Actually 40 years ago, almost to the day. It was a week before Christmas. No, or maybe, I think it was. It was, I don't know that you could probably look up the date, but Pink Floyd, everyone knew, had been building the show at the sports arena for well over a month. Everybody in town knew that they were spending millions of dollars, and it was a rock opera on the grandest scale. My phone rings, and in my studio in West LA, and I get a call, and it says, they asked for me in a British accent, and I said it was me, and they said, well, this is Steve O'Rourke. I'm Pink Floyd's manager, and we're having a bit of a problem down here. And so I thought it was one of my British friends winding me up. So in my notorious wise guy that I am, I said, I'm so happy you called. I need 25 tickets for tomorrow night. and what you heard on the phone was silence, and then you heard this, I don't think you understand. I am Steve O'Rourke. I am Pink Floyd's manager. We're having a bit of a problem down here. Would you mind coming down to visit us immediately? And I said, yeah, sure. So I went down there, and at the Pink Floyd of my life, musically, I was a fan, as other people were, but I was mostly, David Gilmour was the one, because they were like an anonymous band. Right. They really were. Love that. And Gilmour was the one that I really had clicked into up to that point. So when I got down there, I was introduced to Gerald Scarfe first. I didn't know who he was. Then Roger came out. I was introduced to Roger. And then they took me for a tour of what they had been doing. And it was mind-blowing. I mean, it was just out of, nobody had even attempted anything like this ever. And they said to me, we're in a bit of a jam. There's something missing, and we need your help. Would you mind coming back this evening for a dress rehearsal? Then tell us what you think. So I said, okay. So I went away and came back a few hours later. And they didn't think I was going to come back. They thought they had scared me. And I watched the show, and I brought a set of 3x5 cards with me, and I wrote all these notes. And after the rehearsal, I was ushered into Roger's trailer. And I think it was Roger and Gerald, but I'm not sure. It might have just been Roger and me. And we started talking. And he said, well, what did you think? I said, well, you know, everything is on all the time, right from the get-go. So I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I did write a whole lot of notes. And I started going through the notes. And he said, well, what would be the first thing you would do? I said, the first thing I would do is not bring the cherry pickers up on the downbeat of the first song. I said, I would save the cherry pickers.
Yep.
Because you have pyro in the first song, you have pyro going off, the band's here, you got a ghost band behind you. Nobody knows what the fuck's going on. And I said I'd wait until you get to Another Brick in the Wall, part 2, where you hear this helicopter sound. And I'd say I'd start it in darkness, and then the cherry pickers come up during the helicopter sound. I think if we can start with that, you know, I think we that would become the, you know, the way we can work together, you know, where I need to turn things off, you know. I mean, I don't need to put any more things on. So when we do really big things, they matter, you know. Right. I mean, you're opening tomorrow night, you know. So as soon as I said that, somebody else was there. He turns to somebody and goes, get me Graham. So Graham Fleming came in, who I didn't know was the lighting designer, but he was also part owner of Britannia Row at the time. And he walks in and Roger looks at him and goes, you're fired. You have cotton in your ears. You know?
Oh, my God.
And I looked at Graham and he looked at me like he was going to kill me, you know. And I mean, we became friends later.
Sure.
But and then he goes, you're dismissed. And Graham leaves, right?
Very British.
And then he looks at me and he says, right. He goes, well, we open tomorrow night, so you have a lot of work to do, and so you're dismissed, right? And so Steve O'Rourke was there, so he walks out with me. And I'm like, what the fuck did I get myself into? So I walk through the vomitorium, and as I walk through, there's like, you know, 200 guys working on this thing. It's the last night before. And suddenly you hear all the work come to a stop. It was like that Merrill Lynch commercial where, you know, everything gets really quiet, you know. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm really fucked up. And then 2 guys start walking toward me, and they both walk up to me, and the one guy goes, hi, I'm Robbie Williams, and I'm in charge of the sound. And the other guy goes, hi, I'm Mark Fisher, and I think you need our help. And they became my best friends for years. And somehow we got through it, you know. Graham almost killed me the next night. He was still there. He didn't get fired. But I mean, yeah, that was how I started with Floyd.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Well, let me ask you a question, and this may be too sensitive to answer. Did you get your 25 tickets?
I'll say yes over the years, and a lot more than that, you know. So I'll say yes to that. I did. Maybe not that night, but I did.
Since we're talking about Pink Floyd, I have a couple of follow-ups here because I saw Pink Floyd in 1970 in Fort Lauderdale, sitting in the dirt, you know, and their big lighting effect was basically cranking up the Genie Towers at the very beginning and then having a mirror ball at the end. It was always about the music, the sound, and it was about these spatial effects. And then I saw the Division Bell tour, which is the Pulse, you know, from the Pulse DVD. And it's interesting because the very first song of that concert was Astronomy Domine. And you used a lot of like the liquid light effects, or it was a film that looked like liquid light effects.
No, they were real. In '94, yeah, they were real.
That was real. So they actually used the overhead. Oh, that's really cool.
I used it for that, and also I used it for. We had a bunch of telescan projectors out there, and I had adapted 2 of them I adapted two of them to be overhead projectors, or one of them, and we could write on the film too. And at the beginning of Another Brick in the Wall, you see this hand come in and crosses out. Yeah, that was live.
I didn't know
live.
that.
That was all done
filmed.
live.
Wow.
No,
very impressive.
Neither one. No, we had the oils were real too.
Well, back when in the first Dark Side of the Moon tour, they had, and I explained, I was talking about this on the show because we were talking about how to light a mirror ball. And I was talking about that moment sitting in the dirt and watching Eclipse. And they basically had a light box, and in front of this light box, they had this mirror ball that was cut in half that was spinning clockwise. And right when it hit the corona of the eclipse, they hit it with some follow spots, and it was like this amazing effect. And that mirror ball sort of like continued as an iconic Pink Floyd thing. And then you ended up with this gigantic mirror ball in Division Bell.
Yeah, it was David basically told the same story to me. And Mark Fisher rejoined us. He wasn't there in '87 because the camp split. And he went off with Roger, but I went with David. And I suggested he come back for '94. I had already designed the Hollywood Bowl looking structure, and Fisher built it along with Robbie. And Mark's was just amazing. So we got to the mirror ball, and Mark obviously had been around for those shows. And so he actually, with all of us, but it was, he just took it and put it on steroids. I mean, the funny part about that was actually the mirror ball was a distraction for us, just to get back to the 25 tickets again, was a distraction for us to build that huge mix area in the middle where there was 100 guest seats, which I was in charge of. So when I said that I did get, and Michael Cole was not happy about that. They were 100 tickets off Manifest. You know what I mean?
Well, that took a lot of space. That was a huge footprint. Yeah, if you could look at it.
Yeah, well, I said to Fisher, well, if you're going to put that out back behind me, then I want a huge, I want a guest area in front of me with a nightclub underneath. And there was. There was this nightclub underneath the guest area where the band would come out and play, including David and Nick. They'd come out too. Sometimes at intermission, and the crowd never even knew.
Wow.
And they would play for the guests. I mean, we would have our parties out there. And that was Mark and I being mischievous, because that was really in the beginning when Cole was doing his 360 deals with the Stones and us, and then it was U2, and then it was Madonna, which begot Live Nation. And the mirror ball was so big. How
big was it?
It was 30. It opened to 36 feet in diameter. I think
David was right on.
Yep, I was right on. I said 40 feet. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was 36 feet. They auctioned off those panels, the leaves, 2 years ago. They told me they were saving one for me over in England, but to ship it over here is just stupid. That's just like,
Where are you going to put it?
I put it in my backyard, but I'm already in trouble. Yeah, I'm in trouble with my neighbors already, because Phillips has lit my property, and
I saw that. That was advertised on the Phillips website.
Yeah, I know. I get in trouble. It got vandalized last week.
Oh no!
Actually, and I didn't. I just remembered I didn't call my insurance guy today.
Man, I got the next question, which is sort of moving into the future a little bit, or your present. So, could you tell us a little bit about how your work in concert lighting led you to the art that you're making now? Because you mentioned on the Geezers podcast, Leo Villarreal and James Turrell, both people I have a lot of respect for. And tell us about your entry into the world of fine arts.
I'll get back to David Byrne. He's 73 now. David Gilmour's 73. I'm hanging out with Steve Miller. He's 76. Roger Waters is probably 74. I mean, I'm going to be 67. If you don't continually change and try to continue exploring and challenging yourself, I mean, I don't know. I mean, to me, that's not really being an artist. I mean, if I'm walking around telling people I'm an artist now, I need to be doing other things. And so, and obviously with technology the way it is, now you really could do this type of, I'm working on some things right now that are really very interesting with some young video artists and coders and things that are part of the company, the collective we have called Tactical Maneuver. We have an artist collective. And so I have young people that work with me. And when I say young, it sounds like I'm really old, but no, they're all artists. They're in their 20s and 30s and amazing. And we all have a really good time. I like being dad. You know,
Are you hoping to see some of that work be commissioned or landed in museums and kind of give a legacy to your, sort of like you're taking your talent and then giving it to society in sort of a permanent collection of some kind? Is that sort of the goal?
I mean, I did a film 4 years ago that finally went on permanent exhibition at the Empire State Building 3 weeks ago, and the owner of the building has been very kind to me, and they put me in the new big exhibition. They have this whole new experience there, and they spent a lot of money, and they've featured me on the 80th floor. So that's my first real installation.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
and it's treated as an art piece.
Right.
We have another art installation at another one of his buildings in Manhattan, a very prominent building. And that's treated as a gallery installation, even though it's not in the, let's say the mainstream galleries. And we look at ourselves as artists, plain and simple. You know, so just that's what we do.
Very cool. Yeah, the website is great. I stumbled into it. That's how I got your email. And but you're sort of stealth in a way, and then I realized it was you, and I'm excited for you. I'm excited to as somebody who's looked at your work over the years to see what you produce now is also very exciting for me and for the young people who should be following your work.
Yeah, I mean I appreciate that, and it's fun. I mean it's good to be alive, and I have a 10-year-old daughter, so I have to stay current.
Right.
Very cool. Let's go back for a second. And I just want to tell a real quick story. When I was teaching at SMU many, many, many years ago, one day Jim Waits gave me a call and he said, "What are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Oh, nothing." He goes, "Grab your students, come to Texas Stadium." He goes, "Tonight's the final dress rehearsal for the Genesis The Way We Walk tour. And, come on in. You could look at the lighting rig. You check out the show, meet, the designer. At the time, I didn't know it was Mark. And we did. We went down there to Texas Stadium. There was probably about 250 people there, in the audience in Texas Stadium, if you can imagine. And we saw this amazing show. And after, I forgot if it was after or before, Jim introduced us to Mark, and it was great. The students were thrilled. And it was a fantastic design. And Mark did a lot of some of the things you never did before, like using those jumbotrons as a video projection screen, which was amazing.
On railroad tracks.
And didn't you have guys driving them? Weren't they manually driven?
They were. It was the first time, that you had like a large scale screen. It was before LED.
Right.
The Jumbotron was state of the art, and they moved.
Yeah.
There was a lot of really interesting people. Geiger Engineering out of New York were actually the people and the water ballasts underneath the PA were huge. To allow those lights to go up and down the wires. And also, it helped support the railroad tracks. They were railroad tracks in the back. It was crazy.
That's interesting.
Morris Lida, who lives in Australia, I just spoke to him last week. He was our production manager, mad genius. He anything I would say he would just go and do. I mean, he was completely crazy, and he had been with Genesis for years, and I dearly love Morris. He was a character. Those were the days when there wasn't, the accountants and the promoters and, everybody was independent and people expected these bands to surprise them. And the bands were very involved artistically and nobody said no. Nobody talked about their brand presence or any of the other stuff. It was a different time.
Right.
So there was a lot of room to be creative. and to spend money.
It was like the golden age of rock and roll design because you had enough technology that you can create some incredible theatrical moments.
Stevie Van Zandt always said it, and he's said it for years, that we've lived through the Renaissance, or the Renaissance, a second time. And he said golden age also.
I just must tell you that there are songs on that DVD, and again, it's this tour is actually out on DVD. It's a decent filming of it, especially if we consider the time. But there are songs that I use in class to show my students some.
What, the Genesis is out there? I never saw it.
Oh yeah,
and they released that.
Yes,
I never look at my work.
Oh, you should check it out.
I don't know, man.
Mark, I'll send you a copy because I think I have an extra.
No, that's okay. Not after I tell you what I'm going to say. So they sent me from Sony the new Pink Floyd, the latter years or whatever. And I came back from New York after Thanksgiving. He was sitting on my table, and I looked at it. I opened the box, and then I just looked at it. And it said from 1987 to 2019. And I did the math, and I went, fuck, that's like half my life in that box. I'm not opening it. But, and it's still sitting on my table a month later now. I have not opened it. I called London, and I thanked everybody for sending me the box and thinking of me. But then I said, I can't go into a Costco because I get overwhelmed. So I can't open your box set because I'm sorry. Don't take it personally.
That's a great story.
Well, for our listeners out there, I believe it's called The Way We Walk, and it's a live concert of this tour that we're talking about right now. And I forgot what year it was, Mark. It was before Pulse. I know that. But I must tell you that there's some exquisite lighting design in that. Driving the Last Spike, Home by the Sea. I'm going to just go on and on about using darkness and using conventions and using magnificent work of the lights moving, like Mark says, actually moving on a truss, on the wires. It's just beautiful work. So again, bravo to that. I just had to mention it.
Thank you.
Well, as they say, all good things come to an end. It's time to put on your Yoda costume and give a little advice to our high school students and college students listening in today.
I would say close your eyes and listen to the music. Don't watch a video. Don't even read anything about the band. Just listen to the music. I mean, if that's that type of design. But then if you're a theatrical designer, I mean, even to the EDM people, just listen to what the DJs are doing. They're making music. They got the beats, but just close your eyes and then think about what you want to see, but not, what you really want to see.
Right.
That's probably some Yoda advice. But in the theatrical world, I think it's the same thing. It's, you read the script, you close your eyes, you start thinking about the story, you read it again, you start dreaming about it, then you start collaborating. Collaboration's a really big deal. Maybe try to even engage the artist,
Yeah.
But not on just technology, not on what's the newest, coolest thing that some engineer. It's cool that they have that, but it's how you use it.
Right.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on Light Talk today and allowing us to ask you these questions and giving some great advice to our listeners. It's a thrill for us to have you on as part of our Legends of Light series. And thanks again, man. It's great meeting you again.
Really great.
No, thank you all. No, seriously, it was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for taking the time and being so generous with your thoughts and your stories. And I'm looking forward to seeing the newest stuff that you come out with. The Empire State Building work is fabulous.
Yeah, it's fun. We have a good time there.
Yeah, it's really great.
We really do. Especially when we put Eminem up there at the top last year. That was great. That was one of the, that was something I dreamt about for 3 years, to put an artist at 103. So that's the kind of thing where, I dreamt about it.
Yeah.
Love
it. Took 3 years to get there. So it does patience. That's the last thing I'll say.
Yeah,
Patience.
Dreams come true.
Well, everybody, that Hammond organ solo tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, LiveDesignOnline.com, and just about any other podcast provider out there. And be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. That way you won't miss 1 second of crazy Lumen insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
But just in case you decide to litigate us, the law firm of Flecht, Flocht, Flair, and Glare and their paralegal Snoop will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State. Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen humor and knowledge around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Thanks again, Mark. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, Mark.
And good luck.
Bye, Mark.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.